breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this new episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I am Dr. Glenn Harrison, and my co-host?
I'm Dr. Kolby Condos.
There we go. That was a little slow, but you did pretty good. So I'm really excited about this because you went into a really interesting interview with your wife and your better half, we'll call it that. She was on once before, which was really exciting, but to talk about insurance. Now, no, I don't take insurance in my clinic. Insurance doesn't cover what we do as a lot of services that you provide as of the last time we talked about this. But why is insurance such an important topic for our viewers?
Yeah, so I think that when we were looking at topics that we were going to approach, and when we initially came up with this idea of brainstorming, it was trying to break down gaps between healthcare providers and patients. And one of the most common themes that we see in our practice, mine and my wife's, is questions with insurance. You know, why don't you take insurance? Why does insurance do this? Why is this covered but this is not covered? So we felt like that was something that was a common theme that a lot of our patients were having questions with. And we figured that if our patients were having questions, a lot of you might be having questions as well. So yeah, I interviewed my wife, who is definitely more articulate and talented than I am. Let's just say that out loud. She's a much better interviewer and interviewee than I am. So there's always that. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I get replaced as the co-host eventually.
Well, I am taking interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have an application out.
Awesome. No, that's great. There were some really interesting pieces in it that I know very little about the insurance model. So I thought it was really, really exciting to see both sides of the coin. From what some of your patients or patients in general are challenged with, because they don't know these things, and then what it looks like from the doctor's side.
Right, and I think that is one of the bigger things, is that we never look at it from the other side, the other perspective. You know, patients are not providers, and providers, even though they are patients usually for somebody else, when we take our doctor hat off or whatever, we're the same as everybody else, and we want things to be covered, but that's not always the case. So I think it is interesting, and I thought it's useful to know how it works. I think it's useful to know like what how insurance works is contractually. I think it's important to know like how insurance works via like whether it's the copay or whether it's a deductible. I thought that that's all super interesting because, I mean, until I started in the healthcare field, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think this was an amazing interview, and and I think you were just along for the ride, but it turned out amazing. So let's give it a watch.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. This week we have a special guest who's actually not new to the podcast or the video cast. It's actually my wife and the partner of my business, Dr. Dajana Condos. And today we're going to talk about something that normally is at the forefront of everyone's mind when they come in for a new patient exam. And when a patient comes in, they have questions about, what my insurance covers, what it doesn't cover. Are you in network with my insurance provider? And today we're going to break down really what insurance is, what it is not, and maybe why some providers choose to accept or to not accept certain insurances, or even if there's an issue with the insurance not actually accepting new providers into their network. If this is, again, your first time listening, thanks for listening, and turn on the notifications because we're going to continue to break down not only common health concerns and conditions, but we're also going to break down other aspects of your health that maybe you have questions about, like insurance. So thanks for coming. You still look good.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so when I was talking with Dr. Glenn about this, you are a lot better about answering questions for insurance, as you know. In fact, it happens on a day-to-day basis at our clinic. So we asked you to be on because we felt that you'd be able to give more clear and concise answers as far as like why certain things are the way they are with insurance. So to get started, why don't you tell everyone exactly like what insurance is and what it entails?
Yeah. So that's usually one of the very first questions that we get asked at our clinic. And it's usually the first one we want to answer so that people, when they're coming into our clinic, they kind of know what they're looking at in terms of cost, and if they do have insurance, if insurance is going to cover it. So that's usually the first thing we try to address, because we don't want any sort of surprises for our patient. We want our clinic to be a place where patients can get better, and that's all they need to worry about. So kind of addressing that upfront stuff right away is a great thing to start out with before we begin care. So health insurance is essentially, it's a contract between, typically your employer, that covers things that are like healthcare needs, medical healthcare needs, surgical procedures, emergencies, things like that. What the big misconception is that health insurance is a contract between the policyholder, so the patient, and their insurance. That's where people get really confused, and they say, well, you should know what my insurance does and doesn't cover. And that's something that's provided by the insurance to the patient. And so that's a insurance patient contract kind of a thing. If insurance accepts, or if a clinic accepts your insurance, then they have a separate contract with the insurance company themselves. So if there's a clinic that's in network with a particular insurance, then they're responsible for knowing, what they're going to be submitting, what kind of things are covered in patient visits. So if patients will authorize benefits for somebody, or if clinics will authorize benefits for a patient, it's typically a courtesy. It's really the patient's responsibility to understand the details of what their policy covers.
So when you say they're doing like an authorization, what you mean by that is that the clinic, or us, is actually calling that patient's insurance company and verifying their policy, correct? So you're calling and verifying, like, okay, so I'm going to do this therapy, or I'm going to do this exam code, or whatever, and you're just calling to verify that that will in fact be covered, so that you can inform the patient, yes, this will be covered, no, this won't be covered.
Yes.
So to summarize basically what you just said, it's not a contract between the doctor and the insurance company directly. It's two separate contracts. It's between the patient and the insurance company, and then there's a separate contract between the insurance company and the doctor. It's not a contract between the patient and the doctor. So I think that basically summarized it perfectly. And you did it a lot more clearly than I could have. So yeah. So as far as like us as an example, there are certain insurance providers that we are in network with and we are not in network with. Can you tell us maybe why some of the benefits and the reasons why we choose to do that or not to do that, or if there's certain stipulations that prevent us from joining certain insurance companies?
Yeah, so oftentimes doctors will choose to be in network or out of network with particular insurance companies for a couple different reasons. If an insurance company's reimbursements are low, or if their covered services are low, if they only cover a small number of services, typically what ends up happening is the patient ends up paying more in the long run for those services, because then if there's something that's not covered, then it becomes the patient's responsibility, and they're not given an option to pay with potentially a discounted service if they choose to pay at the time of service. And then some networks, they have a cap on how many providers that can be accepted into the network in a particular area. So we've had personal experience with this when we first opened our clinic. We had received a lot of pushback from a particular insurance company that was a closed network. So they, in Minnesota at the time, and I believe still currently, are not accepting new providers into their network. So that definitely is a drawback for sure. So then what ends up happening is then the providers end up saying, okay, well, we're going to have a strongly based cash practice, and we're going to offer a really good discount to our patients. And then that makes it a little bit more affordable.
Sure. And then on top of that, it also eliminates a lot of like the man hours involved with billing insurance. That's another reason why certain clinics or providers will choose to go cash only, is because people don't realize that when you're with the patient, that's only about half of the time that you spend on a patient at that time. So you see the patient not only for the visit, but then you also spend a lot of time charting and then coding and then billing that. So if you take insurance, then what you're going to end up doing is you're spending double the time on the patient. And if the reimbursement rates are really, really low, then it might not be financially possible to do that, because not only are you doing double the amount of work, but then you're also paying either a billing company or a billing specialist, or you're paying for extra software to be able to send out that bill to the insurance company. So you're also incurring all these fees, whether that's through man hours or a billing company or the extra software. So if the reimbursement rates are really low and then you're having to pay extra to actually bill that out, then maybe that's not actually possible for the clinic, especially if the reimbursement rates are really poor. So yeah, I mean, that's even with our clinic, the reason why we take specific insurances, or like you talked about, one of the insurance companies was closed network, which is unfortunate because that's a big provider in our area. And I'm sure that there's other areas of the country that are also like that. And the reason that they were a closed network is because actually they felt at that time that there was enough providers in the area to adequately supply the needs of their patients or their clients. So when people say they're a closed network, that's why in a lot of cases that those insurance companies are closed, because they feel like per the population of their patients or clients that are in the area, there's enough doctors in the area to suit that need. So I think that clears it up a little bit. What are some benefits for providers to take insurance? Why is it that certain providers take insurance versus not taking insurance?
Yeah, I think kind of to go along with what are the reasons maybe why a provider wouldn't take insurance. I think that in a case where a provider is a cash only practice, or they don't have the issue with dealing with insurance, what will happen is they have more freedom. So if a doctor is restricted by their insurance company to do this, or we will only cover this, we won't cover that, then it really does put the doctor in a tough position, because if we believe that something is medically necessary for a patient to have a particular procedure or to have something done in our clinic, one of two things will happen. If the provider does that service and the insurance doesn't cover it, but the doctor believes it's medically necessary, one of two things happen. Either the doctor doesn't get paid or the patients get a big bill. And so it puts you at this really difficult position where somebody needs something, but you have to choose either to not charge them, to charge them and have them get a big bill, or to not do it because the patient can't afford it. So it really puts us in a really difficult position. So I think when a doctor is not accepting insurance and they're going cash, there's a lot of freedom for doctors to be able to not be dictated by what the insurance company believes that a patient should or shouldn't have in terms of services. So yeah, that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that perfectly sums it up. Even for us, like, you're torn because you're like, I believe that this is really going to help and benefit the patient. But right. A, am I going to get reimbursed for this, for my time? Because a lot of them time-based codes, as you know. B, if I do send this out, is there going to be a big bill to the patient? Is the patient going to be really, really mad about this? Or C, do you just do it and then you're not going to bill it, and then you end up, you're out your time and then you're not being compensated fairly. So then it puts a lot of strain on the doctor and the patient relationship, because then they feel like the doctor feels occasionally that they are taken advantage of because they're doing all this work to try to get this patient better and they're not reimbursed. And the patient doesn't even really realize that this is happening in a lot of cases. This has even happened to me where, you get burnt out a little bit because you're like, man, I'm doing all this work. They're getting better, but I feel like I'm not being compensated fairly for my time and effort. Well, the patient doesn't even know that's happening. And that was one of the big motivating factors for this specific episode, because first thing people ask when they come in, do you guys accept my insurance? And they don't understand, if you don't, why you don't. And they don't understand the intricacies of the relationship and the contracts between insurance companies and providers, and then insurance companies and the patients as well. I think that one thing that we haven't talked about as coming from the provider standpoint is when you look at what are the benefits to actually taking insurance. When you take insurance, it actually eliminates a big hurdle, because people have insurance, they want to use it. People feel like they're paying for it, which I justifiably so. I would want to use it as well. And it really eliminates a big hurdle, because there's not as much of a financial investment in most cases for patients when they want to come in for care. Do you want to extrapolate a little bit on that even?
I think the accessibility is there, that patients are able to come in and not have any worry at all. I'm in network, particularly with an insurance company that is a $10 copay. It's excellent. Patients could come in. There's no worry. Most of the patients can afford the $10, and it really is wonderful for them. And that's a $10 copay across the board. So I think that that's one thing that's excellent. And I think from a patient standpoint, there are certainly a lot of advantages, just like you said, because they're paying into this. These are their benefits that they're paying for. So patients want to be able to use them. And absolutely, we are constantly putting ourselves in the patient's shoes to try to determine what's the best case for our patients. We obviously have to be concerned from a business standpoint, but what is the best case for the patients? And I think one of our worries is that if there's a lot of administrative work and patient, paperwork that needs to be done for a particular insurance company, then essentially what ends up happening is the patient times are blocks of times that are reserved for seeing patients are shortened. So time gets shorter if there has to be more paperwork. But yeah, ideally, if insurance is reimbursed well and it's a low copay, it really does work out excellently.
I think that you brought up an interesting point too. What you just said about the times. How many times have we heard patients saying, I just feel like I don't get enough time with my doctor, with my physician. And really what they don't realize is that is not their choice. If the doctor had the choice between spending a half an hour with you or spending 5 minutes with you, they would obviously rather spend a half an hour. But the problem with that is that in order to like basically make ends meet, and to be able to pay for all the extra stuff that they're entailed with taking insurance, is they can only have those small minute appointments, because then they're forced to do the paperwork. Like we talked about before, where, you're only spending half the time with the patient that you're spending on the patient. So a doctor's seeing a patient for 5 minutes and he's spending 15 minutes charting. Well, then if the reimbursement rates are really, really low, what they end up doing is they end up pushing more patients through. So then you see patients every 5 minutes. And then at the end of the night, you have a mountain of paperwork that you have to go back and do, because they're not being compensated fairly for their time. And in order to do that, and in order to actually turn a profit, a lot of these hospitals and independent clinics and that are just pushing more and more patients through, because that's what they have to do to meet their bottom line. So I think that that's another thing that people don't really realize about the insurance things. In a lot of cases, it's not actually the doctor's choice or their it's not that they want to only spend a limited amount of time with you. It's that they are actually unable to, because of all the other aspects of care that we don't really think about when we go in for an appointment. So we've covered what are the benefits of a provider taking insurance, what are the benefits for the patient with insurance, what are the benefits associated with seeing a provider who doesn't take insurance?
Yeah, I think, there's more time that's spent. There's certainly less administrative work. The doctor has less fighting to do with an insurance company for particular procedures. And so the doctor can really choose any procedure that they believe is medically, necessary for the patient without any sort of pushback.
Yeah, I mean, that sums it up perfectly. You get to decide what you want to do. You don't have to worry about whether that procedure, that code is going to be covered by insurance. And then in some cases, clinics or hospitals or providers or whatever can actually offer a little bit of a cash discount for the time of service. If you pay at the time of service rather than them having to send out a bill, they can give you a discount as well in a lot of cases. And I think that can be beneficial to patients as well, especially if you have like a large deductible. You look at, some of these patients have $10,000 deductibles. I mean, you can see a lot of providers for $10,000.
Yeah.
So,
and we have a big patient base of patients that have health insurance, but they have a high deductible. And that is where we've noticed in our practice, things are trending. A lot of small businesses, they're providing great health insurance to their patients, but it's $13,000 deductible. And so the nice part is that our patients with those high deductibles, we hope that they don't ever meet that deductible throughout the year. That, if they don't meet that deductible, that's a great thing. But with our patients, we can give them the time of service discount if they pay at the time of service, and then we give them a receipt and they can send that bill into their insurance, and it would potentially, depending on what their coverage looks like, can potentially be applied to their deductible. So if by chance in December of the end of that year, if they do meet their deductible, then they may see some sort of, of the visits in our clinic that they were seen for applied to that, deductible. So it works well. I would say, like, when we first started, we were printing lots of receipts for patients at the beginning of care, and then patients just kind of felt like it was a lot of work, and they got a really good service for, what they paid for. So a lot of our patients ended up just saying, you know what, I don't even want to bother trying to submit it myself. It's very easy. You just send the receipt in the mail. But most patients end up just saying, you know what, this service means something to me. This is healthcare. And I think that that's where another, misconception is that some of the preventative services, yes, they are healthcare. That's what we would term healthcare. But typically, if they're preventative services, those items are just not going to be covered underneath health insurance. So I think that that's kind of the hard part is, what is preventative and what isn't. So that's another big thing for our patients.
Right. I think that you basically just summed up proactive care versus reactive care, right?
Yeah.
We would rather pay for, an emergency room visit rather than being proactive about it, which is just where we're at, unfortunately, right now as a healthcare system.
Yeah.
I think that one of the common themes that we see in our practice is that there's a lot of times that insurance can sometimes sabotage the doctor-patient relationship, because then there's a lack of trust. Like, I know that there's been certain circumstances where I actually had a patient come in and they were mad because they got a bill for 6 visits, and it was like around, I can't remember if it was like around $100 or something like that. And he felt like he had been betrayed because his specific insurance policy didn't cover one of the therapies that we had billed. And that's where it gets really, really hard, because like we talked about, we don't know exactly what your benefits are. In a lot of cases, I was an out-of-network provider, so I wasn't actually taking his insurance, but he was actually sure that his insurance would cover this, and ended up not covering it. So I think that insurance is really, really useful. It's really, really helpful, especially in the event of a big-time medical emergency. But in a lot of cases, for stuff like chiropractic care, functional medicine, functional neurology, or even like, a nutritionist or a dietitian or something like that, then you have to really look into your health benefits to make sure that those things are covered if you do want to use it. And then if you decide you don't want to use it, then ask them about a time of service discount or a cash discount, because sometimes that can be definitely beneficial for you as well, because it makes services way more attainable and financially affordable if you're able to pay at the time of service. So I know that one other thing that we have a lot of questions on is Medicare. So why don't we cover Medicare a little bit, and then try to wrap this thing up a little bit.
So Medicare is typically for patients that are 65 and older, and Medicare is typically primary. Secondary insurances are something that either your employer, if you're retired, or your employer you had with your work, or you pay for some sort of secondary insurance. What Medicare in terms of chiropractic covers is they cover only spinal manipulation. They do not cover the new patient exam. However, a new patient exam in our world is required. We do not see a patient without doing a new patient exam. It's just not safe. It is not a good idea. And so they don't cover the new patient exam. There are some very few secondary insurances that will come through and pay for the new patient exam. It's very individual based on each plan, but most of the time we typically see that Medicare and supplementary do not cover the new patient exam. After that, then patients, if they come in for spinal adjustments, then Medicare does cover the spinal adjustments. And then depending on their secondary insurance, there's typically a small copay with that the secondary will usually come through and cover. And they don't cover things like therapies. They don't cover any sort of nutritional consultation. And really, to be honest, most insurance companies do not cover any sort of nutritional consultation. They don't cover extremities, so things like wrists or knees. Those are all things that come out of pocket. And the great part is that we, for example, in our office, what we do is we have an ABN, which is something we cover once a year with the patient, sometimes more depending if their insurance has changed. But the ABN is basically it's a great form that gives us the opportunity to talk with the patient and say, here's what we know that your insurance won't cover. If they do somehow happen to cover it and we've asked you to pay for that service, we will reimburse you. And so it just gives patients a little bit more peace of mind. Like I said at the beginning, we don't like patients to have some sort of unexpected cost. We like them to know upfront what their insurance will most likely cover and what they won't. It just makes things way easier. And so it's very rare that we have a patient that's upset because something isn't covered. We're very good about making sure that we let them know the things that will and won't be covered. So I like the ABN personally. It's a little bit redundant having to go over it once a year, but it's kind of a reminder is this is what your benefits, entail. And so patients kind of know what they're looking at in terms of if they have coverage or if they don't.
Yeah, it's just a lot of transparency. You know what I mean? That way they know exactly what they're getting, what they're not going to get. They know that what they may be asked to pay for or what they might not be asked to pay for. I think that you summarized that beautifully. Medicare seems to be one that we have a lot of questions on, so I figured that would be something that was really good to throw in and finish up on. So thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
You're super good at this. We had a lot of compliments on the last one because you're super articulate and sound super awesome, which is awesome because I'm not. So you're the better half. So if you guys have any questions or comments, you guys can get a hold of us. info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. You can get on our website, www.northlakeschiropractic.com. Dr. Glenn's website is www.grgharrison.com. We're going to go over this a little bit for an intro and extra with Dr. Glenn and myself, but I think that we've pretty much covered everything we can. Unless you guys have any questions, you guys can, again, contact us that way, and we will try to answer those best we can. But thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, Dr. Kolby, that was an absolutely amazing interview. And I knew she was going to make you look bad, but she pulled the line for you.
She carried her weight. Her back's hurt. It's a good thing we're chiropractors because her back's hurting from carrying this team. Let's just say that.
But I thought it was remarkable. Again, I don't, insurance doesn't do really much for anything in our office and what our approach is, but I thought it was pretty remarkable. I personally learned a lot of things. Maybe one of the biggest things that I took away was that patients have the ability to access all this information. In fact, that is really the only way to do it and not depend on the provider to give them the information about the policy.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a provider that is not in network with your insurance company, that provider is unable to actually verify benefits. So I think that is something that a lot of patients don't realize. Just because a provider is not in network with your insurance company does not mean you can't see them. In a lot of cases, some patients will have out of network coverage and they just have to call and verify that. So, I mean, even in our clinic, we always recommend that that potential patients or people who are interested in our services call and verify their out of network benefits, because there is the possibility that some or all of them may be covered depending on their policy. But unfortunately, we cannot check that for them. They have got to be the one that checks it.
Yeah. And then another thing, and I do know that insurance requires a lot of work from the clinic standpoint, hiring more people, the insurance paperwork gets more and more comprehensive. But to see all that side of it, of the labor that's being put in, and I know about the dynamics and the history of your office and how much extra work that takes. You're right in it, up to your elbows with your wife on these challenges. How much time would you say you and her put in for every hour with clients, would you say, of paperwork you guys are dealing with, billing and paperwork and charting? And
so that's kind of an,
I don't want to give you a headache. I just kind of curious.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's not just writing the note, as you know. Then it is, making sure that you have everything filled out and sent off to the billing company. If something gets kicked back to you, you have to go through and recode it or whatever you got to do. I mean, we're talking, if you're spending an hour with patients, at least an hour doing paperwork, not just doing the notes, but doing all of it. And it's not just on those patients. When you send out bills to insurance companies, you batch them. So you send a bunch, but I mean, that's time. So if you add it all together, it's a significant amount of time. It's gotten to the point so much that we've actually had to adjust our schedules because we were bringing so much of our work home with us. that we weren't actually able to spend like all of our time with our kid, with our daughter when we were at home. We were constantly working on our computers. We were constantly doing this. So we've had to adjust our schedules even at work accordingly so that we can maintain a healthy work-life balance.
Yeah. How can you talk about health and treat patients if you aren't able to balance your own life?
Exactly.
Right. So there are challenges. So those are some of the things from maybe the doctor standpoint. But what do you see some of the, you guys talked about the challenges of the patient and surprises that they get. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that, or what you guys see and what was discussed in the interview.
Yeah, I think that, again, verifying your out-of-network benefits and verifying your policy to begin with can go a long ways. And knowing what your policy contains and what is covered, what's not covered, can go a long ways from eliminating one of those surprise bills or a big bill. I mean, other than that, it does happen occasionally, which is unfortunate, but we do our best, and I know other clinics do their best as well to make sure that doesn't happen. Sometimes it is truly that we just don't have access to looking at your policy. So knowing what your policy is going to be huge. And then again, a lot of people don't know that they have out-of-network benefits, and that's because, the insurance company wants you to go to in-network providers because they have negotiated a lower fee schedule. So the insurance company can pay, they pay that doctor what they've agreed upon. And when a doctor is out of network, then that just means that doctor has not agreed to that fee schedule. It doesn't mean that you can't see them, but that's again where you need to verify your out-of-network benefits and see what your coverage is.
So it's kind of like if you have some hail damage to your roof, you don't necessarily ask the roofer what your hail coverage is.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
You call your insurance company so they can tell you, because the chances are the roofer is not going to know all the details of your policy or all the different companies out there.
He doesn't know if you have coverage, if you don't have coverage. He doesn't know what your policy entails. So knowing what your policy contains is going to be the biggest part to making sure that you don't get
a
surprise bill.
Yeah.
And then again, if you don't have, say you don't have coverage and you still want to come in or you want to see a specific provider, you can always ask them if they have a time of service discount. If they do, if they can work out a payment plan and stuff like that. And most clinics, I know ours does, are pretty flexible and will work with you. So.
Yeah. Well, that's good. What were some of if there's three take home points that for anybody that you picked up from the interview that would be the most helpful for someone trying to navigate their insurance benefits and what to expect with regards to insurance?
Sure. Man, my wife would be so much better at this than I would. I would say, again, verifying your policy before you go in, right? So the last thing you want to do, because the provider has got to be reimbursed for his time. So the last thing you want to do is go in for a new patient exam or a consultation or whatever you're going to do, and then go, well, let me check and make sure my benefits will cover
kind of like
this.
the roofer. Kind of like the roofer.
Exactly. You don't want to check your insurance company or your insurance coverage after the roof's already on. You know what I mean?
That's right.
After it's been replaced. So doing your work beforehand. Most clinics can give you a rough estimate about what they believe that the bill will be. And that's rough. I mean, that is not set in stone because they honestly don't know until they see the patient. But knowing what your benefits are, and then again, knowing if you can submit a receipt or a bill afterwards for reimbursement is huge. And, realizing that a lot of times insurance companies are going to say no, but it's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of deal. The more that you work at it, the more likely you are to be reimbursed at some point or to get better coverage.
Okay. Is there any resources? Now I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, you or your wife. Any resources that you would direct people to going in for different insurance companies? Or is there anything that you would, in a direction, you point them to websites? Would you point them
a lot of the insurance companies usually have a website. I always do better when I'm talking to somebody. I feel like I always get further with my questions if I'm physically talking to somebody. So I would say call the number on the back of your card and verify it. And just tell them what's going on. I'm coming in and I'm just shooting from the hip here. I have bursitis and I want to make sure that X, Y, and Z is covered because that's what the chiropractor or the physical therapist or the medical doctor or whatever said, I'm going to need to get better. Am I going to have coverage?
Mm-hmm.
And then they can usually tell you, yes, no, maybe you should consider going this route instead. And then that's how you can tell what is going to be covered and what won't be covered, or at least a rough estimate.
Yeah. And a lot of these insurance companies, they're trying to because their hands are tied, they're trying to create the best experience for their customer, their client. So they usually are going to try to point the people in the right direction, or the most accurate direction that they're aware of. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that was great. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on regarding that interview?
No, I was going to just say, if insurance is such a complex game, this is by no means like the most thorough podcast or source of information, but I feel like it's a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have questions, or, a friend or family member or whatever is fighting with insurance, they have questions, you don't really understand it, feel free to share this with them. We're just here trying to help best we can, and help bridge some gaps between, like we talked about initially, the doctor and the patient, or the clinic and the patient. So if you guys got value out of this, share it, please.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at info, brainstormingwiththedocs.com, right? Is that what we are?
Yep. Info at brainstormingwiththedocs.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can get on our websites, www.northlakescheropractic.com and www.drgharrison.com. So
yeah, lots of resources.
I'm happy to help you guys if you have any questions on that. Or you can reach out on social media too. Facebook, North Lakes Chiropractic and Functional Neurology, and the Center of Functional Medicine, Denver, right?
Yeah. You'll find us. We're there.
All right, man. Next week, going to be a new surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So
a new surprise.
It's going to be a new thing.
Yeah, so we're excited about that. All right, Dr. Kolby, it was a pleasure, and tell your wife that we are still taking applications. So.
Okay, I will. All right, man. Have a good one. Talk to you soon.